Hello, gardeners and farmers. Are you planning for growing beans at home? Well, here's a planting guide for beans. Bean plants are annual vegetables that grow quickly at home. Beans are a great plant for beginning gardeners to grow, as they are easy to plant, maintain, and harvest. Growing beans at home is an excellent option for many gardeners. Bean is the common name for the seeds of several genera that belongs to the Fabaceae family. People have been planting beans for centuries for use as snap beans, shelling beans, or dry beans. Now, let's get into the details of growing beans at home. This information may be useful in growing beans at home in the balcony, terrace, backyard, greenhouse, polyhouse, shade net, indoors, pots, containers, raised beds, and grow bags. Beans are easy to grow plants in containers. This is why it is a good plant choice to try for a first-time vegetable gardener. This legume plant has a symbiotic relationship with nitrogen-fixing bacteria, by which helps to improve soil nutrition. Planting beans in your vegetable garden is a trouble-free and easy way to enjoy plenty of this delicious and nutritious vegetable. The flowers appear about 2 months after planting. Harvest time of beans changes depending on the type of bean plant and the desired stage. You can grow bean plants directly in the ground or raised bed or in a pot. Varieties for growing beans at home. In general, there are 2 types of beans like shell beans and snap beans. Both bean types can grow in the pole or bush style, but the bean pods make them unique. Shell beans are removed from their pod to be eaten and are consumed fresh or dried to save for later, while snap beans are eaten inside their pod and are only eaten fresh, not dried for later use. Some popular shell beans include black beans, fava beans, black-eyed peas, garbanzo beans, and kidney beans. Some popular snap beans include snap green beans, adzuki beans, mung beans, asparagus beans, and scarlet runner beans. Bush beans, also known as dwarf beans, are short and sturdy. Instead of vining, this variety grows in a bush about 2 feet high and does not require trellising. Bush bean plants are popular for their short harvesting period. Because of how easy they are to grow, bush beans are a practical choice for beginners. Bush beans also a good choice for gardeners who don't wish to use trellises or other supports with their potted plants. The best bush bean varieties for growing in containers are Asterisk Contender, Asterisk Kentucky Bean, Asterisk Purple Teepee, Asterisk Top Crop. Pole beans. Pole beans are the tall and vining beans. Pole bean plants are climbers with twisting vines that need support to grow vertically. Pole bean plants grow fast, shooting up trellises or any nearby support. That's why it is ideal for home gardens. They take up more vertical space than lateral space, making pole beans easier to grow in small spaces. The vertical vining makes them visually stunning and allows for easier harvesting. The best pole bean varieties for growing in containers are Blue Lake, Kentucky Wonder, Algarve, Golden Gate. Prepare your soil for growing beans at home. Bean plants grow best in soil with good drainage and lots of nutrients. To prepare your soil, mix garden compost and gardening topsoil into the garden plot. Incorporating the compost into the soil will help to provide plenty of nutrients to help the bean plants grow. Bean plants are nitrogen-fixing, meaning they can pull nitrogen from the air and add fertility to the soil. When growing beans in containers, potting soil is essential for healthy plants. Bean plants do well in fertile, moisture-retentive soil rich in organic content. Either you can buy a ready-made potting mix or make your own. For making your potting mix, combine equal parts of compost, garden loam, and clean, coarse builder's sand. Add in some organic manure to the soil and then mix thoroughly. Also, you can use equal parts peat moss or compost with pasteurized soil and perlite. Though pasteurized soil helps reduce the risk of weeds and pathogens in the potting mix. The bean plant prefers soil with Fe levels between 6.0 and 7.0. That is, neutral to slightly acidic. You can use Fe strips to test the potting mix to ensure it is within the recommended range. Remember to incorporate some organic manure or vegetable fertilizer into the mix before planting beans. Light requirement for growing beans at home. Bush beans require 6 to 8 hours of sunlight per day. If beans are being grown over the winter season, grow lights will become a great friend. By using grow lights on bean plants, the amount of light the plants receive over the day is controlled and can potentially give them some heat as well. Placing bean plants in a window area that receives enough natural sunlight is another great option. Remember that windows are cold spots in the house, so the temperature by the window may be too cold for your bean plant. Conditions and requirements for growing beans at home. Bean plants need full sun for the best yield. Beans tend to stop flowering in the extreme heat in the summer season, but keep them well watered, and they will resume flowering and production when temperatures cool. Full sun also helps to keep the bean plants dry and less likely to be affected by a disease. To successfully grow green beans, you need to select a container deep enough to grow the beans. The appropriate depth depends on the beans variety you want to grow. Sow all beans and cover the bean seeds with sand, peat, vermiculite, or aged compost to prevent soil crusting. Provide support for pole beans as well. Growing pole beans gives you the advantage of maximizing space and are easier to pick. Growing beans do not need supplemental fertilizer, but they do need consistent irrigation, especially while budding and on into setting pods. Depending upon weather conditions, water bean plants with 1 inch of water per week. Growing beans at home from seeds. Bean seeds germinate in about 7 to 10 days. You should keep the soil moist during the seed germination process. Add mulch to the soil to retain moisture. Plant the beans in rows. Either you can plant the beans in a container or directly in the soil. Bean plants would need about 6 inches or 15 centimeters of loose and fertile soil. Bean plants make their fertilizer, so do not put too much fertilizer into the soil. If too much nitrogen is provided through the fertilizer, the vines and plant leaves will get big, but there will be fewer beans to harvest. How to grow beans indoors. Generally, dwarf broad beans and dwarf runner beans crop well indoors. Beans are usually direct sown in the garden, as they dislike being transplanted. The plant roots are shallow and easily damaged. If you want to start beans inside, plant them in biodegradable pots, and then transplant the entire container into the garden. The most important rule of growing beans is not to plant the seeds too early. If you want to start beans indoors, sow seed in peat pots about 3 to 2 weeks before transplanting seedlings to the garden. Plant the seeds about 1 inch deep and be sure to water the soil immediately after planting and then regularly until they sprout. Don't let the soil dry out. Bush beans can be planted in rows 2.5 to 3 feet apart, with seeds placed about 1 to 2 inches apart. After the bean plants germinate, thin the seedlings to 3 to 4 inches apart. Pole beans require some type of support on which to grow. The support must be 6 to 8 feet tall. Be sure the trellis, teepee, fence, or other plant support is in place before you seed. Plant 3 to 4 bean seeds per pole and spaced at least 2 to 3 inches apart. Space poles, trellises, or teepees about 3 to 4 feet apart. Normally, bush beans begin producing before pole beans. Succession planting every 2 weeks will keep bush bean harvest going longer. Growing beans at home in pots or containers. When choosing a container for growing your bean indoors, pole beans need a depth of at least 8 to 9 inches, while bush beans need at least 6 to 7 inches. Your containers have adequate draining holes, but ensure the holes aren't too big. Also, you can cover the holes with a plastic mesh to prevent the soil from leaking out the bottom. Also, you can line the bottom of the pot with about an inch of small stones. Terracotta pots, wooden boxes, and barrels all make great planters for growing bean plants. Unglazed containers are far better at moisture regulation for growing beans. They allow excess water to evaporate, preventing plants from drowning. Firstly, fill your container with the proper potting mix for beans and other vegetables. Also, you can purchase a vegetable start mix or make your own. Then, use equal parts sphagnum moss or compost with pasteurized soil and vermiculite. Your bean seeds will germinate in 7 to 10 days. Once they have pushed up, spread mulch lightly over the soil surface to help conserve moisture. Bean plants need plenty of water, and this is true with the care of potted bean plants. Then, you need to provide irrigation when the top 2 to 3 inches of soil is dry to the touch. After that, fertilize once a month with a diluted liquid vegetable fertilizer unless you mixed a time-release food into the soil medium. Watch for insects and pests and combat with vegetable-friendly products such as horticultural soap or neem oil. Generally, harvest the beans when the pods are medium-sized with firm pods. Use beans fresh for the best taste, or you can freeze or can them to enjoy far past the season. Water requirement for growing beans at home. Bean plants need 1 inch of water per week, and especially when they are flowering. Water when the soil feels dry at a depth of about 2 or 3 inches and mulch to retain moisture. If you don't keep beans well hydrated, they will stop flowering and reducing yields. Underwatered bean plants will stop flowering. Feed your beans at home. Fertilize your beans once every month with a balanced liquid fertilizer at half strength. You can skip this if you used a slow-releasing fertilizer in the potting mix when planting. A bit of compost manure is also an excellent alternative to liquid fertilizer. However, exercise moderating when feeding bean plants. How to grow beans at home in water. You can grow your beans at home from dry beans by using cotton and water to make the bean seeds germinate. The steps to growing beans at home in water are: Step 1. Firstly, soak the bean seed in some water on a saucer for 1 hour. Step 2. Swirl some amount of water around the jar. Leave the jar wet and don't dry it. The bean seed will need that bit of water to begin to grow. Step 3. Roll up a piece of kitchen towel or a napkin and then put it inside the jar, pressing it against the glass. Then, slip bean seed in between the napkin and the glass. Step 4. After that, put the jar with the bean in it on a windowsill where it will get plenty of light. Use a plant spray to sprinkle a little water on it every day. Too much water can be bad for bean plants, so make sure it's damp rather than wet. Step 5. After a few days, your beans start to sprout roots, and this is called germination. Also, the bean will start to grow a stem, and the stem must grow upwards as it looks for the light. Step 6. After 10 days, your bean seed should have grown a bigger stem and some leaves. It is now a little bean plant. To make sure it keeps growing and produces beans you can eat, carefully take it out of the jar and then plant it in a large pot with some soil, watering often. Growing black beans at home. Black beans are also known as turtle beans, Tampico beans, or Mexican black beans. Black beans are tasty beans that make a nutritious addition to many dishes. Pick out a sunny spot for growing bean plants. Black beans love sunlight, so make sure to select or choose a plot that will get full sun during the day. Ideally, your bean plants should get about 6 hours of sunlight total each day. Bean plants do not need a lot of fertilizer. However, if you've grown other plants on the same plot, especially other bean plants, it may be a good idea to enrich the soil with a bit of organic fertilizer before planting. Select or choose a fertilizer with low nitrogen content for ideal bean production. Giving black bean plants too much nitrogen can cause plants to produce lots of leaves and produce few beans. Black beans are hardy plants that don't require a lot of water. Take care not to overwater your black beans. Black beans have shallow roots, so you will need to use caution when pulling up any weeds around plants. Always pull up weeds by hand, and then try to minimize weed growth as much as possible by mulching around beans and weeding the plot before planting. Black beans are affected by aphids and other pests. Rinse off any pests by using a garden hose on a sharp spray setting, or pick them off by hand. Black beans generally reach maturity and are ready for harvest 90 to 140 days after planting. If the black bean plant is a bush variety, all the pods should mature at the same time. If you have a vining variety, you will want to harvest the pods regularly throughout the growing season to encourage continued production. Bean growing tips for success. To begin growing beans indoors, gardeners will first need to choose a container. Beans do well in larger containers, but grow best in those which are narrow. Each container must be filled with a well-draining potting mix that has been enriched with compost. Bean plants grow best in loose, well-worked, well-drained soil rich in organic matter. Bean plants are a good choice for container planting. Bean plants require even, consistent watering. Avoid overhead watering. When plants are 12 inches tall, mulch with aged compost to both feed your plant and keep soil moisture even. Common pests and diseases in growing beans at home. Bacterial bean blight is a common problem with bean plants. Signs of this plant disease are yellow, water-soaked spots on leaves or lesions that look like the leaves are burned. Plant disease-free certified bean seeds and harvest bean plants when they are wet. Avoid overhead watering methods. Bean mosaic disease is another common problem in bean plants. Then, this causes the bean to produce few or no pods. Signs of this disease are yellow or greenish plant leaves and irregularly shaped leaves. Then, there is no sufficient treatment for this at this time. Use disease-resistant plant varieties to prevent this problem. Plant care in growing beans at home. There are different methods you can use to help protect bean plants from pests and keep them out of harm's way. Laying mulch around the base of bean plants can prevent bugs like the striped cucumber beetle from laying their eggs in the soil near the plants. Installing row covers over young bean plants will help prevent insects from eating the plants before they can fruit. Also, you can use hoops or stakes to secure lightweight cloth over the rows, which will prevent larger bugs from damaging the plant. Pests that bother beans include eaf miner, bean leaf beetle, Mexican bean beetle, corn earworm, slugs. Some control methods include handpicking and disposing of pests or using organic pesticides when necessary. When and how to harvest beans. Pods are ready to pick 45 to 65 days after planting, or 1 to 2 weeks after blossoms appear. Beans are harvested for their green pods before they are fully mature. The pods must be long, firm, and crisp. Bush beans will be ready for harvest about 50 to 60 after sowing. Pole beans will be ready for harvest about 60 to 90 days after harvest. Pick beans when pods are young and tender, about 3 inches long, or before seeds begin to bulge and grow plump. Cut or snap beans off of the plant and be careful not to tear pods from branches. Continue to pick bean pods before they become mature so that the plant will continue flowering and producing new pods. When seeds mature on the bush or vine, the bean plant will die. Avoid harvesting beans when the weather is hot or very cold. Commonly asked questions about growing beans at home: can beans be grown in pots? Beans are growing well in pots and containers. Both pole beans and bush beans grow well in containers or pots. Bush beans plants do not need a support structure, but they will take up more room in your garden. Can you pick green beans too early? You will get the best flavor and texture if you pick your beans at the right time. You should try and harvest your beans when the plants are dry. Let the morning dew evaporate before harvesting. Why are my bean plants dying? Green beans require the proper amount of nutrients to grow. Too much or too little of a certain nutrient will result in a stunted or dying bean plant. Getting a soil test done before planting is the best method to know what nutrients to add to the soil. This was all you need to know about growing beans. Now tighten up your belts and do follow the steps to get your best bean crop. We will recommend you to watch our another video on how to grow and harvest carrot for more variety. Thanks for watching the video and make sure to subscribe.